The Dark Enlightenment Part 4b, Obnoxious Observations. Nick Land. Although black families and parents of boys aren't the only ones who worry about the safety of adolescents, Tillman, Brown and other parents say raising black boys is perhaps the most stressful aspect of parenting because they're dealing with a society that is fearful and hostile toward them, simply because of the color of their skin. Don't believe it? Walk a day in my shoes, Brown said. Brown said that at 14, his son is at that critical age when he's always worried about his safety because of profiling. I don't want to scare him or have him paint people with a broad brush, but, historically, we black males have been stigmatized as the purveyors of crime and wherever we are, we're suspect, Brown said. Black parents who don't make that fact clear, he and others said, do it at their son's peril. Any African American parent not having that conversation is being irresponsible, Brown said. I see this whole thing as an opportunity for us to speak frankly, openly and honestly about race relations. Gracie Bond Staples, Star-Telegram. When communities resist an influx of Section 8 housing voucher holders from the inner city, say, they are reacting overwhelmingly to behavior. Skin color is a proxy for that behavior. If inner-city blacks behave like Asians, cramming as much knowledge into their kids as they can possibly fit into their skulls, the lingering wariness towards lower-income blacks that many Americans unquestionably harbor would disappear. Are there irredeemable racists among Americans? To be sure. They come in all colors, and we should deplore all of them. But the issue of race in the United States is more complex than polite company is usually allowed to express. Heather MacDonald, City Journal. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. I'm black, okay? The woman said, declining to be identified because she anticipated backlash due to her race. She leaned in to look a reporter directly in the eyes. There were black boys robbing houses in this neighborhood, she said. That's why George was suspicious of Trayvon Martin. Chris Franceschini, Reuters. In brief, dialectics can be defined as the doctrine of the unity of opposites. This embodies the essence of dialectics, Lenin notes, but it requires explanations and development. That is to say, further discussion. The sublimation, Aufhebung, of Marxism into Leninism is an eventuality that is best grasped crudely. By forging a revolutionary communist politics of broad application, almost entirely divorced from the mature material conditions or advanced social contradictions that had been previously anticipated, Lenin demonstrated that dialectical tension coincided, exhaustively, with its politicization, and that all reference to a dialectics of nature is no more than retrospective subordination of the scientific domain to a political model. Dialectics are as real as they are made to be. The dialectic begins with political agitation, and extends no further than its practical, antagonistic, factional and coalitional logic. It is the superstructure for itself, or against natural limitation, practically appropriating the political sphere in its broadest graspable extension as a platform for social domination. Everywhere that there is argument, there is an unresolved opportunity to rule. The cathedral incarnates these lessons. It has no need to espouse Leninism, or operational communist dialectics, because it recognizes nothing else. There is scarcely a fragment of the social superstructure that has escaped dialectical reconstruction, through articulate antagonism, polarization, binary structuring, and reversal. Within the academy, the media, even the fine arts, political supersaturation has prevailed, identifying even the most minuscule elements of apprehension with conflictual social critique and egalitarian teleology. Communism is the universal implication. More dialectics is more politics, and more politics means progress or social migration to the left. The production of public agreement only leads in one direction, and within public disagreement, such impetus already exists in embryo. It is only in the absence of agreement, and of publicly articulated disagreement, which is to say, in non-dialectics, non-argument, subpolitical diversity, or politically uncoordinated initiative, that the right-wing refuge of the economy, and civil society more widely, is to be found. When no agreement is necessary, or coercively demanded, negative, or libertarian liberty is still possible, and this non-argumentative other of dialectics is easily formulated, even if, in a free society, it doesn't need to be, do your own thing. Quite clearly, this irresponsible and negligent imperative is politically intolerable. It coincides exactly with leftist depression, retrogression, or depoliticization. Nothing cries out more urgently to be argued against. At the opposite extreme lies the dialectical ecstasy of theatrical justice, in which the argumentative structure of legal proceedings is coupled with publicization through the media. Dialectical enthusiasm finds its definitive expression in a courtroom drama that combines lawyers, journalists, community activists, and other agents of the revolutionary superstructure in the production of a show trial. Social contradictions are staged, antagonistic cases articulated, and resolution institutionally expected. This is Hegel for primetime television, and now for the internet. It is the way that the cathedral shares its message with the people. Sometimes, in its impatient passion for progress, this message can trip over itself, because even though the agents of the cathedral are infinitely reasonable, they are ever less sensible, often strikingly incompetent, and prone to making mistakes. This is to be expected on theological grounds. As the state becomes God, it degenerates into imbecility, on the model of the holy fool. The media politics of the Trayvon Martin spectacle provides a pertinent example. In the United States, as in any other large country, lots of things happen every day, exhibiting innumerable patterns of varying obscurity. For instance, on an average day, there are roughly 3,400 violent crimes, including 40 murders, 230 rapes, 1,000 robberies, and 2,100 aggravated assaults, alongside 25,000 non-violent property crimes, burglaries and thefts. Very few of these will be widely publicized, or seized upon as educational, exemplary, and representative. Even were the media not inclined towards a narrative-based selection of good stories, the sheer volume of incidents would compel something of the kind. Given this situation, it is all but inevitable that people will ask, why are they telling us this? Almost everything about the death of Trayvon Martin is controversial, except for media motivation. On that topic there is near unanimity. The meaning or intended message of the story of the case could scarcely have been more transparent. White racist paranoia makes America dangerous for black people. It would thus rehearse the dialectic of racial terror, your fear is scary, designed, as always, to convert America's reciprocal social nightmare into a unilateral morality play, allocating legitimate dread exclusively to one side of the country's principal racial divide. It seemed perfect. A malignantly deluded white vigilante guns down an innocent black child, justifying black fear, the talk, whilst exposing white panic as a murderous psychosis. This is a story of such archetypal progressive meaning that it cannot be told too many times. In fact, it was just too good to be true. It soon became evident, however, that media selection, even when reinforced by the celebrity, community activist rage machine, hadn't sufficed to keep the story on script, and both of the main actors were drifting from their assigned roles. If progressively endorsed stereotypes were to be even remotely preserved, vigorous editing would be required. This was especially necessary because certain evil, racist, bigoted readers of the Miami Herald were beginning to forge a narrative-wrecking mental connection between Trayvon Martin and burglary tool. As for the killer, George Zimmerman, the name said it all. He was clearly going to be a hulking, pasty-faced, stormtrooper lookalike, hopefully some kind of Christian gun nut, and maybe, if they really hit pay dirt, a militia movement type with a history of homophobia and anti-abortion activism. He started off white for no obvious reason beyond media incompetence and narrative programming, then found himself transformed into a white Hispanic, a category that seems to have been rapidly innovated on the spot, before gradually shifted through a series of ever more reality-compliant ethnic complications, culminating in the discovery of his Afro-Peruvian great-grandfather. In the heart of the cathedral it was well into head-scratching time. Here was the great American defendant being prepped for his show trial, the president had pitched in emotionally on behalf of the sacred victim, and the coordinated ground game had been advanced to the simmering brink of race riots, when the message began falling apart to such an extent that it now threatened to decay into an annoyingly irrelevant case of black-on-black violence. It was not only that George Zimmerman had black ancestry, making him simply black by the left's own social constructivist standards, he had also grown up amicably among black people, with 2 African American girls as part of the household for years, had entered into joint business venture with a black partner, he was a registered Democrat, and even some kind of community organizer. So why did Martin die? Was it for carrying iced tea and a bag of Skittles while black, the media and community activist approved, son Obama might have had version, for scoping out burglary targets, the Kluxer racial profiling version, or for breaking Zimmerman's nose, knocking him over, sitting on top of him, and smashing his head repeatedly against the sidewalk, to be decided in court? Was he a martyr to racial injustice, a low-level social predator, or a human symptom of American urban crisis? The only thing that was really clear when legal proceedings began, beyond the squalid sadness of the episode, was that it was not resolving anything. For a sense of just how disconcertingly the approved lesson had disintegrated by the time Zimmerman was charged with second-degree murder, it is only necessary to read this post by HBD blogger once describing the dialectical derangements of the race warrior right. Despite the disturbing nature of the charges against Zimmerman, many in the alt-right refused to grant Zimmerman any sympathy or to even view this as a seminal moment in modern leftism's anarcho-tyrannical reign. According to these individuals, the Spanish-speaking, registered Democrat mestizo got what was coming to him, the ire of the black mob and the elite left indirectly buttressed by Zimmerman himself. Due to his voting record, multicultural background, and mentoring of minority youth, they see Zimmerman as emblematic of the left's assault on white America, a sort of ground soldier in the campaign against American whiteness. Bolding and original. The pop PC police were ready to move on. With a great show trial collapsing into narrative disorder, it was time to refocus on the message, facts be damned, and double damned. Jezebel best exemplifies the hectoring, vaguely hysterical tone. You know how you can tell that black people are still oppressed? Because black people are still oppressed. If you claim that you are not a racist person, or, at least, that you're committed to working your ass off not to be one, which is really the best that any of us can promise, then you must believe that people are fundamentally born equal. So if that's true, then in a vacuum, factors like skin color should have no effect on anyone's success. Right? And therefore, if you really believe that all people are created equal, then when you see that drastic racial inequalities exist in the real world, the only thing that you could possibly conclude is that some external force is holding certain people back. Like racism. Right? So congratulations. You believe in racism. Unless you don't actually think that people are born equal. And if you don't believe that people are born equal, then you're a FG racist. Does anyone really believe that people are born equal, in the way it is understood here? Believe, that is, not only that a formal expectation of equal treatment is a prerequisite for civilized interaction, but that any revealed deviation from substantial equality of outcome is an obvious, unambiguous indication of oppression. That's the only thing you could possibly conclude. At the very least, Jezebel should be congratulated for expressing the progressive faith in its purest form, entirely uncontaminated by sensitivity to evidence or uncertainty of any kind, casually contemptuous of any relevant research, whether existent or merely conceivable, and supremely confident about its own moral invincibility. If the facts are morally wrong, so much worse for the facts, that's the only position that could possibly be adopted, even if it's based upon a mixture of wishful thinking, deliberate ignorance, and insultingly childish lies. To call the belief in substantial human equality a superstition is to insult superstition. It might be unwarranted to believe in leprechauns, but at least the person who holds to such a belief isn't watching them not exist, for every waking hour of the day. Human inequality, in contrast, and in all of its abundant multiplicity, is constantly on display, as people exhibit their variations in gender, ethnicity, physical attractiveness, size and shape, strength, health, agility, charm, humor, wit, industriousness, and sociability, among countless other features, traits, abilities, and aspects of their personality, some immediately and conspicuously, some only slowly over time. To absorb even the slightest fraction of all this and to conclude, in the only way possible, that it is either nothing at all, or a social construct and index of oppression, is sheer Gnostic delirium, a commitment beyond all evidence to the existence of a true and good world veiled by appearances. People are not equal, they do not develop equally, their goals and achievements are not equal, and nothing can make them equal. Substantial equality has no relation to reality, except as its systematic negation. Violence on a genocidal scale is required to even approximate to a practical egalitarian program, and if anything less ambitious is attempted, people get around it, some more competently than others. To take only the most obvious example, anybody with more than one child knows that nobody is born equal, monozygotic twins and clones perhaps excepted. In fact, everybody is born different, in innumerable ways. Even when, as is normally the case, the implications of these differences for life outcomes are difficult to confidently predict, their existence is undeniable, or at least, sincerely undeniable. Of course, sincerity, or even minimal cognitive coherence, is not remotely the issue here. Jezebel's position, whilst impeccable in its political correctness, is not only factually dubious, but rather laughably absurd, and actually, strictly speaking, insane. It dogmatizes a denial of reality so extreme that nobody could genuinely maintain, or even entertain it, let alone plausible explain or defend it. It is a tenet of faith that cannot be understood, but only asserted, or submitted to, as madness made law, or authoritarian religion. The political commandment of this religion is transparent: accept progressive social policy as the only possible solution to the sin problem of inequality. This commandment is a categorical imperative. No possible fact could ever undermine, complicate, or revise it. If progressive social policy actually results in an exacerbation of the problem, fallen reality is to blame, since the social malady is obviously worse than had been originally envisaged, and only redoubled efforts in the same direction can hope to remedy it. There can be nothing to learn in matters of faith. Eventually, Systematic social collapse teaches the lesson that chronic failure and incremental deterioration could not communicate. That's macro-scale social Darwinism for dummies, and it's the way that civilizations end. Due to its exceptional correlation with substantial variation in social outcomes in modern societies, by far the most troublesome dimension of human biodiversity is intelligence or general problem-solving ability, quantified as IQ, measuring Spearman's G. When statistical common sense or profiling is applied to the proponents of human biodiversity, however, another significant trait is rapidly exposed: a remarkably consistent deficit of agreeableness. Indeed, it is widely accepted within the accursed community itself that most of those stubborn and awkward enough to educate themselves on the topic of human biological variation are significantly socially retarded, with low verbal inhibition, low empathy, and low social integration, resulting in chronic maladaptation to group expectations. The typical EQs of this group can be extracted as the approximate square root of their IQs. Mild autism is typical, sufficient to approach their fellow beings in a spirit of detached, natural scientific curiosity, but not so advanced as to compel total cosmic disengagement. These traits, which they themselves consider, on the basis of copious technical information, to be substantially heritable, have manifest social consequences, reducing employment opportunities, incomes, and even reproductive potential. Despite all the free therapeutic advice available in the progressive environment, this obnoxiousness shows no sign of diminishing, and might even be intensifying. As Jezebel shows so clearly, this can only possibly be a sign of structural oppression. Why can't obnoxious people get a break? The history is damning. Sociables have always had it in for the obnoxious, often declining to marry or do business with them, excluding them from group activities and political office, labeling them with slurs, ostracizing and avoiding them. Obnoxiousness has been stigmatized and stereotyped in extremely negative terms, to such an extent that many of the obnoxious have sought out more sensitive labels, such as socially challenged, or differently socially abled. Not uncommonly, people have been verbally or even physically assaulted for no other reason than their radical obnoxiousness. Most tragically of all, due to their complete inability to get on with one another, the obnoxious have never been able to politically mobilize against the structural social oppression they face, or to enter into coalitions with their natural allies, such as cynics, debunkers, contrarians, and Tourette syndrome sufferers. Obnoxiousness has yet to be liberated, although it's probable that the internet will help. Consider John Derbyshire's essay in Infamy: The Talk, non-black version, focusing initially on its relentless obnoxiousness, and attentive to the negative correlation between sociability and objective reason. As Derbyshire notes elsewhere, people are generally incapable of differentiating themselves from group identities, or properly applying statistical generalizations about groups to individual cases, including their own. A rationally indefensible, but socially inevitable, reification of group profiles is psychologically normal, even human, with the result that noisy, non-specific, statistical information is erroneously accepted as a contribution to self-understanding, even when specific information is available. From the perspective of socially autistic, low EQ, rational analysis, this is simply mistaken. If an individual has certain characteristics, the fact of belonging to a group that has similar or dissimilar average characteristics is of no relevance whatsoever. Direct and determinate information about the individual is not to any degree enriched by indirect and indeterminate, probabilistic, information about the groups to which the individual belongs. If an individual's test results are known, for instance, no additional insight is provided by statistical inferences about the test results that might have been expected based on group profiling. An Ashkenazi Jewish moron is no less moronic because he is an Ashkenazi Jew. Elderly Chinese nuns are unlikely to be murderers, but a murderer who happens to be an elderly Chinese nun is neither more nor less murderous than one who is not. This is all extremely obvious, to obnoxious people. To normal people, however, it is not obvious at all. In part this is because rational intelligence is scarce and abnormal among humans, and in part because social intelligence works with what everyone else is thinking, which is to say, with irrational groupish sentiment, meager information, prejudices, stereotypes, and heuristics. Since, almost, everybody else is taking shortcuts, or economizing on reason, it is only rational to react defensively to generalizations that are likely to be reified or inappropriately applied, overriding or substituting for specific perceptions. Anybody who anticipates being predefined through a group identity has an expanded ego investment in that group and the way it is perceived. A generic assessment, however objectively arrived at, will immediately become personal under, even quite remotely, normal conditions. Obnoxious reason can stubbornly insist that anything average cannot be about you, but the message will not be generally received. Human social intelligence is not built that way. Even supposedly sophisticated commentators blunder repeatedly into the most jarring exhibitions of basic statistical incomprehension without the slightest embarrassment, because embarrassment was designed for something else, and for almost exactly the opposite. The failure to understand stereotypes in their scientific, or probabilistic application, is a functional prerequisite of sociability, since the sole alternative to idiocy in this respect is obnoxiousness. Derbyshire's article is noteworthy because it succeeds in being definitively obnoxious, and has been recognized as such, despite the spluttering incoherence of most rejoinders. Among the things that the talk and the counter-talk share is a theatrical structure of pseudo-private conversation designed to be overheard. In both cases, a message that parents are compelled to deliver to their children is staged as the vehicle for a wider social lesson, aimed at those who, through action or inaction, have created a world that is intolerably hazardous to them. This form is intrinsically manipulative, making even the original talk a tempting target of parody. In the original, however, a tone of anguished sincerity is engineered through a deliberate performance of innocence, or ignorance. "Listen, son, I know this will be difficult to understand. Oh, why are they doing this to us?" The counter-talk, in stark contrast, melds its micro-social drama with the clinically non-sociable discourse of methodical inquiries in the human sciences, treating populations as fuzzy biogeographical units with quantifiable characteristics, rather than as legal political subjects in communication. It derides innocence and, by implication, the criterion of sociability itself. Agreement, agreeableness, count for nothing. The rigorously and redundantly compiled statistics say what they say, and if we cannot live with that, so much the worse for us. Yet even to a reasonably sympathetic, or scrupulously obnoxious, reading, Derbyshire's article provides grounds for criticism. For instance, and from the beginning, it is notable that the racial reciprocal of non-black Americans is black Americans, not American blacks, the term Derbyshire selects. This reversal of word order, switching nouns and adjectives, quickly settles into a pattern. Does it matter that Derbyshire requests the extension of civility to any individual black, rather than to black individuals? It certainly makes a difference. To say that someone is black is to say something about them, but to say that someone is a black is to say who they are. The effect is subtly, yet distinctly, menacing, and Derbyshire is too well trained, algebraically, to be excused from noticing it. After all, John Derbyshire is a white sounds equally off, as does any analogous formulation, submerging the individual in the genus, to be retrieved as a mere instance, or example. The more intellectually substantive aspect of this overreach into gratuitous incivility have been examined by William Salatin and Noah Millman, who make very similar points, from the two sides of the liberal/conservative divide. Both writers identify a fissure or methodical incongruity in Derbyshire's article, stemming from its commitment to the micro-social application of macro-social statistical generalizations. Stereotypes, however rigorously confirmed, are essentially inferior to specific knowledge in any concrete social situation, because nobody ever encounters a population. As a liberal of problematic standing, Salatin has no choice but to recoil melodramatically from Derbyshire's stomach-turning conclusions, but his reasons for doing so are not consumed by his gastro-emotional crisis. But what exactly is a statistical truth? He asks. It's a probability estimate you might fall back on if you know nothing about a particular individual. It's an ignorant person's weak substitute for knowledge. Derbyshire, with his aspergery attention to the absence of Black Fields Medal winners, is a math nerd who substitutes statistical intelligence for social intelligence. He recommends group calculations instead of taking the trouble to learn about the person standing in front of you. Millman emphasizes the ironic reversal that switches obnoxious, social scientific knowledge into imperative ignorance. The race realists like to say that they are the ones who are curious about the world, and the politically correct types are the ones who prefer to ignore ugly reality. But the advice Derbyshire gives to his children encourages them not to be too curious about the world around them, for fear of getting hurt. And, as a general rule, that's terrible advice for kids, and not the advice that Derbyshire has followed in his own life. Millman's conclusion is also instructive. So why am I arguing with Derb at all? Well, because he's a friend. And because even lazy, socially irresponsible talk deserves to be refuted, not merely denounced. Is Derbyshire's piece racist? Of course it's racist. His whole point is that it is both rational and morally right for his children to treat black people significantly differently from white people and to fear them. But racist is a descriptive term, not a moral one. The race realist crowd is strongly convinced of the accuracy of Derbyshire's major premises, and they are not going to be argued out of that conviction by the assertion such conviction is racist, nor, honestly, should they be. For that reason, I feel it's important to argue that Derbyshire's conclusions do not follow simply from those premises, and are, in fact, Morally incorrect even if those premises are granted for the sake of argument. Brief intermission.